Sources have told us that India has decided to impose a policy of reciprocity on UK nationals arriving in India. The new regulations will come into effect from October the 4th. What are these new regulations and what are the rules and regulations now that UK nationals will be subject to? What is the difference from the rules and regulations earlier? Vishnu Shom joins us with the very latest. Vishnu, can you elaborate what the new rules are going to be?
Well, this is actually a huge step because, when you've got two of the closest strategic allies having this sort of diplomatic tit-for-tat, then, it becomes an incredibly big issue. Now, basically, it means that all UK nationals, and I should reiterate that this refers to UK nationals, not nationals of other countries, who fly from the United Kingdom and come to India will compulsorily need to have home quarantine for a period of 10 days. This is exactly what Indian nationals face when they travel to the United Kingdom. Now, the sad reality is that even if you're fully vaccinated, you would need, and are a UK national, you would need to quarantine in India just as fully vaccinated Indian nationals need to quarantine for a period of 10 days upon arrival in the United Kingdom. And so it's this tit-for-tat which has been forced upon India despite multiple efforts at the level of the foreign minister down to try and explain to the United Kingdom that there is something incredibly wrong with their policy. If Indian nationals with Covishield are made to quarantine in the United Kingdom, why shouldn't UK nationals with AstraZeneca, which is the same vaccine, be made to quarantine on India upon arrival, is what India is now trying to stress as part of this tit-for-tat policy. But the bottom line is that it's going to affect thousands of people coming from the UK to India. It already affects thousands of Indians traveling from India to the United Kingdom. And it's not something which is people-friendly, but there is a sense that the United Kingdom just refuses to change their policies, which have been there for months. It doesn't make any sense. If I were to travel to the United Kingdom with 2 doses of Covishield, and that mentioned on COVID, my vaccine passport, I would need to do an RT-PCR test before going to the United Kingdom. I would need to home quarantine for 10 days. I would need to do an RT-PCR test on day 2. I would need to do one on day 8. If I wanted to get out earlier, I would need to do one on day 5. And ultimately, if I didn't do that day 5 test, I would still need to spend a total of 10 days in quarantine. Now, UK nationals coming to India will have to face the same situation. So India and the UK have also been talking about vaccine passports. India says our COVID has, when you've taken a batch of COVID, whether you're fully vaccinated, now it's got your date of birth, it's fully compliant. UK officials have met the COVID authorities on several occasions now, but there doesn't appear to be any change in UK policy. So starting on the 4th of October, if you're a UK national, and this is important, not just a third country national from the UK flying to India, only if you're a UK national, you face all of the same hardships that Indian nationals face when they travel to the United Kingdom.
What about Indian nationals who've been vaccinated with the UK AstraZeneca or any of the other vaccines? Do we have any clarity on what happens to Indian nationals?
So that's a technicality we need to look at. So basically what you're asking is, if you are an Indian national in the United Kingdom who has been vaccinated with AstraZeneca and you have an Indian passport, would you be able to come to India and not be home quarantined? I would assume that the answer is no, you would not have to home quarantine because our sources clearly indicate to us that it only applies to UK nationals. In fact, that would necessarily be the case because if you're a UK national over here in India who has got AstraZeneca and is returning to the United Kingdom, they would have got it in the United Kingdom, they've come to India and they're going back, then they don't need to quarantine at all. But your question is slightly different. You're asking what happens to an Indian national, for example, a student who may have been there or a professional who may have been there,
yes,
who is allowed, as per their rules, to get a vaccine in the United Kingdom. What happens to them? Our sources clearly telling us this applies only to UK nationals. So I would assume that Indian nationals could pass freely. By which I mean that Indian nationals, remember, Ritika, when they come into to India from the United Kingdom, still need to do an RT-PCR test at the airport. But if, for example, Delhi is your destination, you do the RT-PCR test and you go home. You don't have to wait for the result. You do need to wait for the result, even as an Indian national, if you're going to another city. So if I was to land in Delhi, I would do an RT-PCR test. I would wait for 6 hours for that result, and only then would I be able to travel, say, to Kolkata, my hometown, right? That would remain. But so as you can see, it's tit for tat. I think that's the bottom line. It gets a bit confusing, but it's tit for tat.
All right.
UK nationals coming to India need to home quarantine for 10 days.